There was a time not that long ago when men of my generation were told that the absolute worst thing we could put in our bodies was a simple plain carbohydrate. I remember standing in the break room at the logistics center right around the time I turned 65, listening to the younger guys talk about how bread, rice, and potatoes were practically poison if you wanted to stay healthy as you aged. I was standing there with a man named Frank. Frank and I had worked the same loading dock for 22 years. We had the exact same rough hands, the exact same bad knees, and the exact same quiet fear that our bodies were starting to slip away from us. We both heard that conversation, and we both decided right then and there that if we wanted to keep our health, we needed to stop eating the heavy foods we grew up on. Frank took that advice to heart in a way that was honestly frightening to watch. He completely cleared out his pantry. He stopped eating anything that came out of the ground that was not a green leaf. He lived on dry salads, thin slices of chicken breast, and black coffee. He was determined to follow the modern rules of health to the letter. And for the first few months, he looked like he was winning. He lost the extra weight around his middle. His shirts fit a little looser. We would stand out by our trucks at the end of a shift, and he would tell me how clean his diet was, how he had completely cut out all the bad carbohydrates. We shook hands, we retired a few months apart, and we walked down two completely different paths toward the rest of our lives. I did not see Frank for about 4 years after we both handed in our keys. The decline in a man rarely happens overnight. It is a slow, silent erosion that happens while you are looking the other way. When I finally crossed paths with him again, it was in the parking lot of the local pharmacy. I almost did not recognize him. Frank was leaning heavily against the side of his car, holding a plastic shopping bag like it weighed 50 pounds. The man who used to easily throw heavy wooden pallets across a concrete floor was struggling to stand upright. His legs had completely withered away. His jeans hung off him like they were draped over a wire hanger. I walked over to see if he needed a hand, and the look in his eyes stopped me cold. It was not just fatigue. It was absolute defeat. He told me his legs simply did not work anymore. He said he had to use both arms to physically push himself out of his living room chair. He said stepping up onto a curb felt like climbing a mountain. He told me he was still eating perfectly clean, still avoiding all those terrible carbohydrates, but his body was just giving out on him. He truly believed that his legs turning to weak, trembling twigs was just the unavoidable reality of getting older. He got into his car, moving with the slow, terrifying hesitation of a man who does not trust his own foundation, and I drove home with a very cold, heavy knot sitting right in the center of my chest. That knot was there because my own legs were starting to feel exactly the same way. I had been following the exact same rules as Frank. I had cut out the potatoes, the rice, the heavy starches, thinking I was protecting my heart and doing the right thing for my age. But a strange creeping weakness had settled into my lower half. My thighs felt hollowed out. When I tried to walk up the 3 wooden steps from the garage to the kitchen, my quads would burn intensely as if the muscle was completely devoid of power. I tried to fix it the way stubborn men try to fix everything. I tried to use brute force. I cleared a spot in my garage, grabbed a heavy wooden broom handle to keep my balance, and started forcing myself to do deep body weight squats every morning. I figured if the muscle was getting weak, I just needed to work it harder. I pushed through the burning pain, assuming I was building the strength back up. But the exact opposite happened. I did not get stronger. My legs got weaker, stiffer, and the hollow feeling turned into a constant deep ache that kept me awake at night. I was doing the work, but the foundation was crumbling anyway. My daughter Megan came over for dinner one Sunday, and she watched me awkwardly lower myself into the dining chair. She is an occupational therapist, and she does not miss a single hesitation when a person moves. I told her about Frank in the parking lot. I told her about my own legs feeling like empty tubes of glass. I proudly told her I was doing my squats in the garage to fight it, and I was making sure to keep my diet perfectly clean by avoiding all those bad carbs. Megan put her fork down, looked at me across the table, and explained the mechanical disaster I had unknowingly created inside my own body. She told me that the human muscle is not just a piece of machinery that runs on nothing. It is a living engine, and that engine requires a highly specific type of fuel to contract, to bear weight, and to repair itself. That fuel is called glycogen, and the only way your body creates glycogen is by breaking down heavy, dense carbohydrates. She explained that when you completely strip things like potatoes and rice from an older man's diet, you are draining the gas tank entirely dry. I was going out to the garage and forcing my legs to do heavy squats with an empty fuel tank. Megan told me what actually happens when you do that. Because my muscles had no stored glycogen to burn for energy, the body panicked. In order to find the fuel it needed to perform the squats, my body literally began cannibalizing its own muscle tissue. I was not building strength. I was actively eating my own legs from the inside out. Frank was doing the same thing just by walking around his house. By starving our bodies of the very thing that locks energy and water into the muscle fibers, we were causing our own decline. She explained that a dense plain carbohydrate, specifically a common white potato, is not the enemy of an aging body. It is the exact raw material the muscle desperately requires to hold its volume and generate raw power. You can do thousands of squats in your garage, but if you do not have the glycogen stored inside the muscle fiber before you start bending your knees, the exercise is 15,000 times less effective than simply resting. The movement without the fuel is just pure destruction. I was furious with myself. I had spent years avoiding the most basic, functional food on the planet because somebody on a television screen who never worked a day on a loading dock said it was a bad habit. I went to the grocery store the very next morning and bought a 10-pound bag of plain, dirt-covered white potatoes. I did not buy into any fancy supplements or expensive protein powders. I went back to the fuel that working men have relied on for generations. I started baking one large white potato every single afternoon. I did not load it with heavy butter or sour cream. I just baked it, let it cool down a bit, and ate it with a little salt and pepper about 2 hours before I did any heavy work in the yard or any squats in my garage. The physical shift in my legs over the next month was something I still have a hard time believing. It was not a sudden explosion of energy. It was a deep, quiet return of solidity. The hollow, burning sensation when I walked up the garage stairs completely disappeared. When I stood up from my deep armchair, I realized I was no longer using the armrests to physically brace my weight. The muscle fibers in my thighs literally felt denser, thicker, and heavier. They were finally holding onto the glycogen and water they needed to function. I was doing the exact same physical movements in the garage, but now the muscles actually had the raw materials to repair the damage and build the strength back up. I ran into Frank again just a few weeks ago at the hardware store. He was riding in one of those motorized electric carts. His wooden cane was resting across his lap. He looked tired, fragile, and completely resigned to his situation. He watched me load 2 heavy bags of topsoil into the bed of my truck. He shook his head and told me I was incredibly lucky to still have my health. He said some guys just get good genetics and some guys just fall apart. He genuinely believed that the only difference between his electric cart and my ability to carry that soil was the luck of the draw. I did not argue with him. I did not have the heart to tell a suffering man that he had essentially starved his own legs to death while trying to be healthy. But the reality is there was absolutely no luck involved. Frank and I stood at the exact same crossroads. We both felt the exact same weakness creeping into our knees. The only difference between his path and my path was a willingness to question the modern rules, to understand how a human engine actually works, and to put the right fuel back into the tank before it was too late. You do not have to accept that your legs are just going to wither away because the calendar keeps turning. You do not have to watch your world shrink down to the size of a motorized cart because you are afraid of the food that actually builds your foundation. The weakness you feel is often not a disease. It is a severe mechanical shortage of fuel. Stop starving your muscles. Stop trying to run a heavy engine on an empty tank. Give your legs the dense, reliable materials they are desperately begging for, and they will hold you up. They have carried you this far, and if you take care of the basic mechanics, they will keep carrying you for a long time to come. I will be around. Take care of your legs, and they will take care of you.